Welcome to AP World History Modern Podcast. This is topic 4.6, Internal and External Challenges to State Power. The essential question in our AMSCO text. How did the development of state power result in external and internal challenges in the period between 1450 and 1750? I was speaking to a reader, AP World History reader that grades these things when you guys take this big exam. Very common mistake, right? If we learn from other people's mistakes, we can do a better job. When there's two parts in a question, oftentimes students address the first part, they forget about the second part because they're in a hurry. You're under time constraints. You're more likely to make mistakes. The essential question is asking state result, external and internal challenges. So if this was something you were doing on a DBQ, don't just answer the external, talk about the internal, which we're going to talk about here. They're probably referring to, I would think, like William of Orange or something. You could consider that, considering who his wife was, an internal challenge. But anyway, we'll get to that. Okay, so here's some of the big themes of this topic. As empires developed and changed, many social, political, and economic groups resisted state expansion through a variety of challenges to state power. Some of these revolts occurred in the home of the empire. An example could be the Fronde civil disturbances in France between 1648 and 1653. It attempted to curb growing royal power. So you're going to see these challenges to royal power, to political power. You're also going to see challenges to religious authority. Even though we haven't talked about it in a minute, we did a DBQ on this, on Gutenberg and a printing press. There's just a theme here you're going to see over and over again. As people gain knowledge and they become literate, they're going to question authority, which is a good thing. They're going to think for themselves more. They're not just going to believe what they're told, right? So you're going to see these all over. Even though we're not talking about the Gutenberg printing press here, you could make a connection with that. Okay, other disturbances are taking place in the colonies. Now, what I always learned is King Philip's War. Your AMSCO text does call it Metacom's War, 1675 to 1678. And, when I'm throwing out dates like that, and when you read it in your AMSCO text, I really doubt, there would be a question on the AP exam that said, what year did King Philip's War start and when did it end? And it's going to ask you to memorize dates. I really doubt that. But the idea is to give you some kind of context and idea, so if you write about it, you have a general idea of when these things are taking place. So, don't worry about memorizing dates so much. But King Philip's War was part of a result of English colonists using underhanded tactics in their continuing pressure to control Native American lands. An example of that's in the AMSCO text on page 243. If you look at the quote, the English made them drunk and then cheated them in bargains. Now, this is something the English, would do a lot of. If you had me for U.S. history when you were in 9th grade, I think I talked about how, the British, they could recruit their own soldiers to send to the colonies, for the American Revolution. They would sit outside of a pub and say, free beer, and guys would come in there, get free pints, and they'd get tanked. And as they stumbled out of the bar, so there'd be some guy like Mr. Salazar waiting for him. He'd punch him right in the face, knock him out. And by the time they woke up, they were on a ship headed to the colonies to fight, right? That's how they got a lot of their soldiers. And so this is something you're going to see over and over again, this kind of, underhanded tactics, as some would say. But several powers sought to create empires in the 16th and 17th centuries. They fought with one another and with indigenous peoples. Another heads up that this AP World History reader told me, a common mistake, and some good advice, I thought, If you're dealing with something like an SAQ, a DBQ, whatever, that says 17th century, for example, so it's a good idea. Put 16 at the top of the paper. Just have it on the side somewhere to remind yourself that the 17th century is 16 something, right? Now you may say, well, I already know that. But what the reader stressed is you won't believe the mistakes you make when you're being timed, right? When you're worried about the seconds ticking off the clock, right? So he said that's something students should do because that's another common mistake. They mess up, 17th century, so they're putting 17 whatever, 81. Okay, so let's move on to some of our topics. Resistance to Portugal in Africa. By the 17th century, the Dutch and the English had pushed the Portuguese out of South Asia. So the Portuguese, remember, they're really good at establishing a maritime empire, right? Sea-based. Not so good on land. So the Portuguese looked to Africa, where it had carried out slave raids since the 15th century, to build a colony. I'm going to talk about somebody here, Anna Nzinga. I always thought her life story would make a great movie. As far as I know, no one's ever made a movie on her life. Pretty interesting. She's going to become the ruler of Indango in South Central Africa. It's present day, what is it? It's Angola. That's like in 1624. In addition to the slave raids by Portugal, other African peoples were attacking Indongo. She makes a deal with Portugal, and she asks for two things in this deal. One, she wants protection from neighboring powers, other African villages or tribes, whatever term you want to use, neighbors, right? Her second, you could call it a demand, she wants an end to Portuguese slave raiding. So she is going to become an ally with Portugal temporarily, but she's going to become an ally with Portugal. She goes as far as to get baptized, and the governor of the Portuguese colony is going to be her godfather, right? So this is some Michael Corleone stuff here, right? And she's really kind of, bonding with the Portuguese here. But eventually the alliance is going to break. And her and her people, they're going to flee west. And they're going to take over the state of Matamba. Then she's going to lead a rebellion, or start a rebellion in Dango. And she's going to jump from the Portuguese. She's going to ally with the Dutch. And offered runaway slaves. She's going to offer them freedom in Matamba. And she's going to rule for decades. She lives a pretty long life. I think she lives to be like 80 or something like that. Don't quote me on that, but she lived a pretty long time. And she builds Matamba into an economically strong state, but very, very interesting individual. Okay, local resistance. Okay, now we're going to really jump here to a completely different part of the world. Again, it's a survey class. AP World History is like a survey class on steroids. I mean, we just jump from topic to topic. You're learning a little bit about a lot of things, right? It's a very different format for you and for me. I usually go, I like deeper dives on these topics, but it is what it is. So now we're going to go to Russia. Now, if you remember, when you talk about Russian history, I think is just one of the most fascinating histories of any country in the history of the world. It reads like a novel. But when you talk about serfs, and again, it's S-E-R-F, not S-U-R, not Beach Boys, right? Russia, serfs. These are like the Russian peasants, right? So we're in Russia. Wars during the 14th and 15th centuries weakened the central government and increased the power of the nobility. So a little different theme going on here. As demands for grain increased, nobles imposed harsh conditions on serfs. Russian serfs had long been oppressed, and they will continue to be well after. We'll get into that more as we continue the course. But a great way to get peasants to work, and you could do a compare and contrast to even today. You know, some people make an argument. Try to warn you guys on your student debt, your student loans, you know, and you know, sometimes you say, yeah, you know, we got it. Don't repeat yourself. But then guess what happens 4 years later? I get former students coming in. Cruz, how in the hell am I going to pay off these student loans? What do I do? What do I do? Debt is a great way to get people to work every day, and they don't get anywhere. Right? The only thing worse than being poor is being poor and you're working your tail off. Like, why am I working all these hours and I'm still poor? That cycle of debt, right? That's what keeps you getting up every morning to try to pay off that debt, right? Debt will just, you know, you're like that, you know, you're like on a treadmill. You're running, but you're not getting anywhere. So this system is in place in Russia at the time, and peasant debt, it increases, and over time, more peasants are going to lose their lands, and they're going to be forced into serfdom. Now, when you're in serfdom and you're in debt, you're just making somebody else rich. And again, I always thought it was a good comparison. You know, go get, you know, I was talking to somebody 2 days ago. She works at a bank, and she has some clients. They have $300,000 in student loans. They're never going to pay them off. So this thing with debt, you know, when you study history, it's not just about learning about the past, but you can help yourself, you know, in your life. But debt is a great way to keep people down. The practice of serfdom benefited the government because it kept the peasants under control, and it was regulated by the nobility, right? If you're in debt and you're just working to pay off your debt, whether we're talking about Russia or we're talking about right now in 2020, you don't have time to read. You don't have time to educate yourself. You don't have time to learn. You don't have time to run for office and try to become a senator, etc. Because you're just trying to pay off you're so focused on paying off your debt, that makes you very easy to control. And that's what's going on here with serfs. Serfs are not sitting around contemplating the meaning of life, you know, reading psychology or theology or philosophy, etc. They're too busy just working. Serfdom, it benefits the landowners big time, because what's a great way to get rich? You know, when you study history, if you can figure out a way to get free labor, you want to call it slavery, you want to call it serfdom, call it whatever you want. Free labor equals big money for the person on top, not for the people working. The serfs, they're pretty much slaves. I think your AMSCO text kind of suggests that as well. It's not just my opinion, but they're pretty much slaves. Their labor is bought and sold along with the lands of their owners. So if you bought property, so I got, 3.5 acres, you get this barn, you get the horses, and the slaves, or the serfs in this case, the serfs come with it. Yeah, that's pretty much slavery. Russia put down peasant revolts, but the Mughals, right? Where are the Mughals at? You should remember that. Mughals, they're defeated, and they see their reign in India come to an end. And who's going to move into India? And I think we talked about this before. India is going to become the crown jewel of what? The British Empire, which I'm sure we're going to study later. Okay, let's go to another topic. The Pueblo Revolt. We're talking 1680. It's against Spain, and it's taking place in what today you would call New Mexico. So we're jumping around a lot in this topic. We were in Africa, went to Russia. Now we're back in North America. The Pueblo and the Apache, two indigenous groups, they fought colonizers who were trying to force religious conversions, right? And again, I'm not here to preach religion or whatever, but whatever religion you are, just, have historical perspective. How would you feel if someone else said, well, the religion that your grandparents taught you and your parents taught you and what you believe in, that's wrong. My religion is the right one. And I'm going to force you to abandon everything you've been taught since you were a little kid. Chances are you would find that rather offensive, wouldn't you? So that's the perspective. It's like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? It's a huge sign of disrespect, condescending, didactic language, right? So the indigenous people in this Pueblo revolt in 1680, they're going to kill approximately 400 Spaniards. They're going to drive the rest out of the area, and they are going to destroy churches. They look at churches as something that's attacking their culture, their beliefs, And you see this constant theme in history. There's, I think there's roughly 500 religions in the world as we speak in 2020. But mine's the right one. And the other 499, yeah, they're all wrong. So that is a recipe for confrontation, right? But the Spanish are going to put down these revolts, and they're going to reconquer the area by 1692. So you're talking roughly 12 years here. But the indigenous people are fighting. They are standing up to the Spanish. And, you're not just talking about killing these indigenous peoples. Again, this book I'm reading right now, Horizon by Barry Lopez, it's such a good book. It just came out. It's not available in paperback yet. Highly recommend it, man. If you want to get a bigger take on what we're talking about, check out Horizon by Barry Lopez. He makes some excellent points in this book. Okay, let's go to struggles for power in England and its colonies. So we're talking about England. England is going to defeat Spanish colonists, and they're going to take control of much of Jamaica in 1655. Slaves in the Caribbean and former Spanish territories in the Americas fought to gain freedom in what was known as the Maroon Wars. You're talking like 1728, 1740, in between there, and then again 1795, 1796. Maroons were descendants of runaway African slaves in Jamaica. They escaped their owners and formed independent settlements. Queen Nanny escaped. She was a former slave. She united the Maroons on the island, and Jamaicans later recognized her as a national hero. She's another person that would make a great movie. Her life story. The first recorded slave revolt in what's now the United States was the Gloucester County Rebellion in Virginia in 1663. Now, it wasn't a successful revolt. Most of these were not. The final major effort of the indigenous people to drive the British from New England, this war, okay, well, I learned this is King Philip's War. Amscol is using Metacom's war, and that's fine, same war. The war spread throughout New England and resulted in the destruction of 12 towns. The war ended with the subjugation of the Wampanoag people in English colonies. England, 1685, a guy you probably have heard of, James II, he becomes the king. Now, what's the problem with King James? He's Catholic. And there's this huge uproar about this because he's anti-Protestant. And this is going to really upset the nobles in England. The nobles, they come up with a pretty creative idea. They're going to invite William of Orange. He's James's nephew. They're gonna get him to invade England and attempt to become the new king. And his wife Mary, I think it was Mary II. She's James' daughter. This is an interesting story. And they actually come back into England, and James ends up fleeing to France. And the English throne remains in Protestant hands after that. This was known as the Glorious Revolution. It's also known as the Bloodless Revolution. As far as the AMSCO text says, as far as my studies have gone, I mean, the undergrad degree, 2 graduate degrees, I've always heard this called the Glorious Revolution. I don't think I ever had one professor call it the Bloodless Revolution. But anyway, it's the same one, Glorious Revolution or Bloodless Revolution. This is going to strengthen the power of Parliament, which passed a law forbidding Catholics to rule England. That's kind of crazy, right? Could you imagine today, like, we're going to ban people from this particular religion, to rule the country? There would be lawyers lining up to cash in on that, right? Okay, so this is a short little topic. Those are some of your big ideas. Please remember, the podcasts are just meant to help you out with the readings if you need it. It is not meant to replace the text. Please make sure you're reading your AMSCO text. And if you really want to pass this AP World History exam, go to my website, apwhcruise.org. I have curated some excellent videos. So podcasts are cool, but videos are even better in my opinion. You see some maps, get some visuals. I have some great AP World History teachers from around the country. I curated their videos, and you can go by topic. Find what teacher you like the best, and check out those videos too. But this was a quick one, not very long, but some pretty important topics.